Demond Williams was excellent in Washington's first fall scrimmage.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just a quick reminder, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, last night, we're recording this on Sunday, we watched Washington's first scrimmage of the fall, and there was so much to like. We want to get into some of the general observations that we took away. The secondary looked fantastic. Luke Dunne had a really good day. I think he might have won the punter battle yesterday, to be completely honest with you. We'll get to that in a little bit because there was an injury to Geirean Hatchet. Looks like he might have avoided something major. We want to talk about him and the rest of this supporting cast at wide receiver, running back a little bit, because Demond Williams, I could not have been more impressed, man. Like, Jedd Fisch loves to talk about how he's a budding superstar. We saw it yesterday.
Absolutely. I mean, there were so many tight window throws that Demond made. I remember a couple of Decker over the middle where if he doesn't throw with the exact zip that he did with the spin that he had, like that's getting picked and going the other way. But it's that, and it's not exactly the Michael Penix factor where, Penix could fit it into such a tight window, but it really had shades of that where he put it right on the money to a number of different guys. And then he still had those arching deep balls where, when you're looking at the fade balls in the end zone, he has all the different kind of, like a pitcher, like, we always like to talk about baseball. Like, he's got all those 3 or 4 different pitches where no matter what, he can find a way to get it in there no matter the situation.
So as soon as you said Decker, sorry, I was just, the one I thought about wasn't that one. It was, he threw just like a really nice deep ball, plays it perfectly. Decker looks tremendous, by the way. He's so athletic for that position, just moves so well in that move tight end role. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to do. That 40-yard bomb, he threw him down the far sideline and just placed it perfectly, like right on the face mask. Those are the kinds of plays that we're talking about for, anybody who might have been out there last night. But there were so many other plays where you said it perfectly. You look at just the fact that it's not just one speed, right? It's the fact that he does have that nice touch on the deep ball where he doesn't just have to throw a fastball to get it down there. No, he can put a little bit of arc under it and drop it in perfectly in the bucket over a defender, which is one of the fun things about having to, or fun, I say in air quotes, because playing against 2 6'4" corners must be extremely difficult. But he just looked so good. And there were so many points where you mentioned it right before we pressed record. There were a couple of drops from the receivers who I think still overall had a really solid day. But I just look at what Demond did. The accuracy was something that stood out after, 78.1% completion percentage in total last season across all 13 games. But all of that was great. Like, standing in the pocket, being able to be a drop back in rhythm passer. But it was when he got out of the pocket and when he was on the move and some of the different just places he was able to put the ball at will, out of the reach of defenders, just some of those different plays that he was able to make throughout the day. That's what separates a good quarterback from a great, potentially elite quarterback in football in general.
No doubt. And the other thing to consider in all this is he did it without his number one target. And as Denzel Washington, I think the fact that he's able to have these connections and build up the relationships with everybody else not named Denzel Boston, I think is very important because we already know what that connection can bring on Saturdays. It's can you find your third, fourth, fifth option or develop those connections with guys like Omari Evans and guys that we'll talk about later on in the show. But just to me, it kind of – I wish people could have seen, the scrimmage because when we talked about Demond, he's an athletic guy so he can, run and do things like that. He forced himself to be a pocket, behind the line of scrimmage quarterback, I want to say. Not a pocket quarterback truly because when he rolled out and things like that, he's not truly in the pocket. But his feet, his movement, his pocket awareness is even more heightened than it was last year. And he already had a pretty good pocket awareness as a freshman, but just the way that he's able to keep his eyes down the field, not panic,
That's the thing, yeah.
Not just instantly say, somebody's coming towards me, I'm going to run for 10 to 15 because I don't get touched in these types of scrimmages, so I can just do whatever I want. that was the best way to do it, where no matter what, he was going to stay in the pocket. He did have a couple of runs, but really, I think I can count him on one hand how many true actual scrambles that he had. He forced himself to stay in the pocket and look downfield, and I think that's exactly what Jedd wanted to see going into year 2 as a full starter.
No, you're right. It is exactly that. It's go through your progressions, go through your reads, try to make a play with your arm first. And then if things break down, it's from Jedd's perspective. It's, I know I have someone who can still get out of the pocket, pick up 5, 7, 10 yards with his legs and potentially more, because he is that kind of athlete. I do want to talk about that for a minute, because that's something that really does stand out every time you watch him. As the everydayers know, that's not the first time we've talked about Demon's athleticism, nor will it be the last, obviously, because we're going to see a whole lot of zone reads and a whole lot of different things like that in the offense this season. But there were so many different plays where, as you said, in these scrimmages, he's not getting touched, nothing like that. But there are different plays where, even as it, starts to slow down, defenders start to slow up as they kind of get to him, he'll kind of kick it into another gear sometimes. And just when he shifts gears like that, there are some points, like even when we're watching him live, it's, yeah, even if that's a full speed tackle, they might not be touching him, because that way he's able to shift and just really kick it into a high gear is so much fun to watch. And it's one of the reasons that Jedd will consistently say, like, hey, he might be one of the fastest, if not the fastest player on this team. And I think about that when you talk about the fact that he can stand in the pocket and make those throws when you need him to, but he can, get outside on a bootleg or some of these different other design plays to get him outside and get him in space and let him just assess the situation, whether it be, making reads downfield or just say, okay, I see my first and second reads aren't open. Let me just pick up these 8 yards that I have in front of me and take the safe route and slide or get out of bounds or do whatever else. And I think that's a really important part of why Jedd Fisch is selling him as this potentially elite quarterback. Is even in Jedd's brief stint as a head coach, where he's going into year 5, he's had some guys that can make plays with his legs. Like, you think Jaden Delore, you think Noah Fafita, but not to this degree.
Not to this degree. Also, I don't think either of those two are truly good passers as Damon is. And I think that's why, Damon has
9 and 23.
Yeah, that's fair. But I just think the potential is certainly there for Damon to put it all together more so.
Exactly. Yeah, no, you're right about that.
But you're absolutely right in the sense of with his ability to be a runner. I mean, I think back to a play where it's also worth kind of spending 10 seconds on this to say, if you're playing a different defense, not your own team, I think the times that Damon would have been sacked, where there's one where Durfee was about to take his head off in the end zone. There's a couple that, Damon kind of sat there and, Durfee rolled back by him. That would have been a sack. But I think in a real game, Damon makes that read, knows and senses that he's coming, steps up a little more quicker in the pocket. So it's not a concern for mine to say, hey, it takes, these types of moments for it to happen. It's like, no, Damon already knows it. He just knows what he can get away with in these type of scrimmages, but he absolutely has all the ability to put it together.
And that's a big thing, because there was one, I checked my notes, that Tacario had too, where he made a really nice move on, it was either Paki Finau or Champ Taulealea, whoever was in at right guard, and was just in the backfield really, really quickly. And obviously they're going to let the play just play out to fruition and different things like that. But you're right, where he is almost to an extent trying to force himself to stay in the pocket right now and go through his progressions and figure some of those things out downfield that he knows in a live game situation. It's okay. Yeah, I know I have free will to get outside the pocket and not just throw the ball away, which that's one thing we want to get to in a little bit. Is this offense is doing a really, really good job of protecting the ball. And a lot of that is because Damon knows to make the smart play already at this point in his career, which lends so much into just all of this hype that Jedd Fisch has put on his shoulders throughout the offseason, is that he's not going to go out there and just give the ball away and try to make a play downfield, a la, Detroit Lions, Matthew Stafford, who Jedd got a chance to work with during his time with the LA Rams and different things like that. It's Damon knows, no, I can just pick up 6-7 yards and get out of bounds. That's something that I think really can't go understated, especially when you talk about right now. It's okay. Yeah, I know I have to stand in the pocket and try to make some of these throws and just continue to build that chemistry with my receivers. And speaking of the receivers, Damon had a really good day, but this season it won't work if everything around him isn't working. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. If you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you. I love Game Time zone deals. I love using them at T-Mobile Park for baseball games. As this Mariners playoff push continues, I'm certainly going to be using it a few more times when I get the chance to watch Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez just continue to demolish the baseball. It's been so much fun to watch. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Lars, when I say it doesn't work if everything around him is not working, that obviously, as our everydayers love to point out in the comments, starts along the offensive line. I think the offensive line had a solid to above average day. Certainly wasn't great, certainly wasn't perfect. And the one unfortunate piece of news from Saturday's scrimmage was Geirean Hatchet went down with what looked like a right knee injury. We saw him have some ice on his knee as he just kind of sat out for the second half. The good news is it doesn't seem like it's a major injury, as Jedd seemed to allude to afterwards. And then he was still kind of out there hanging around with his teammates, walking around a little bit. So it does seem like it might not be a super long-term kind of thing. But in his place, and I was really interested to see what the plan was going to be with this happen, because as you and I have talked about a lot, the biggest battle, maybe even on the team really, has been at left guard, where it's been a redshirt freshman Paki Finau and true freshman John Mills. We kind of got to see what the plan was if something happened just on the interior of the offensive line, and now we know. It's Paki Finau kicked over to right guard for the majority of the rest of the snaps while John stood in on the left side. And I was really intrigued to see how this played out. I think that there were some times where it certainly looked like there was a bit of a chemistry issue, since Paki has played on the left side strictly, like just throughout the year. And I liked what I saw. I think that there's still, a bit of a ways to go. But I think that there is still a really solid plan in place here where, if this does end up keeping Geirean out for, let's even just say it's a month or so, right? Like, let's just say it's a sprained knee. That's just an assumption, nothing else. I think that Washington can not just get by, but that's something where with those two young guys that Jedd couldn't have had higher praise for after the game, I think is still going to wind up being a solid offensive line combination for Washington in the long run.
I agree, and I would throw Champ Taulealea in that mix as well, where
Absolutely,
we saw him get plenty of snaps at right guard specifically. And I think that was kind of the validation for me, where obviously you don't want to see anybody go down, but it was, what happens if Champ needs to play 30, 40 snaps? Like, can he hold up in that versus are we talking 10 to 12, 10, 15 in that demand range last season, where obviously quarterback and offensive line are different, but it's a difference between, can you come in for a couple of drives versus can you finish a half? That I think was the important thing for me. And I think Champ is almost there in terms of being able to finish a half. I think he certainly could against UC Davis and Colorado State. But like you said, it's a month. So can you hold up against Wazoo and Ohio State? That's the other side of that equation that we still have yet to fully see. I think it could happen. But the left side, John Mills, I think, really held up on his own. I think Paki would adjust to right guard if need be, if he had to play there for a couple of weeks. And I think just when you talk about, worth noting in totality, this is the first scrimmage of the fall. So this is the first actual kind of game situation for these guys. And in the drop of a dime, Paki switching over to right guard, I can see that taking a little bit of an adjustment. But if you gave him then another week and a half, practicing there, playing there consistently, I'm sure he would, get much better at it, because we've seen it from the left side where he can absolutely hold up. But I can understand there's a little bit of relationship connection there when you're talking about going to the right side and playing next to Drew and just adjusting the technique and all those sorts of things. But I don't think there's a cause for concern if one of those guys does, happen to need to step up in that sense.
So I agree with you, because I want to take it back to something you mentioned a minute ago, and that was talking about John versus Champ and where they are right now. And it always kind of felt like, as a pass blocker, John, who did play left tackle in high school, versus Champ, who played more on the interior, is a little bit more refined in that regard. And some of that is, the various high school offenses they've learned. But it was something that Jedd talked about after the game, and it's the fact that he's just a little bit stronger after dropping 15 pounds. He did a good job changing his body over the course of the summer, is what he told us. And I think that's something that is really important in this regard because it just seems like they've been gearing John up to find a way to get him on the field. I still think that, and something you and I have talked about a lot, is both of those guys are going to see the field for at least 5 games this season. We do believe that both of them will wind up burning their red shirts. But I look at where John is right now, and they just seem to be a little bit more comfortable with him. And it's why you and I, harped so much on this last winter when he did wind up decommitting from Texas and coming to Washington, was because we knew how much this coaching staff liked him and what he could bring long-term, probably as a tackle option, but pretty immediately as a guard because of that size, because of all these things that he brings to the table. And he's done a really, really good job of showing that. And this is my way of transitioning because we need to talk about these wide receivers as well. Dezmen Roebuck continues to do that just on a practice in, practice out basis.
I forgot which series it was because, again, they got up to 112 plays, 130 total with special teams and things like that. There was one where it was towards the near side where I think it was Damon who threw it. Made a full, whatever Desmond's listed at, used every single inch of his reach to get to the ball and security going inside. It's like no matter what, he's just a glue for the ball. He's always going to find a way to be in position. It was a 3rd down play. They needed 4 yards. I remember what you're talking about, yeah. And he got 5. It was just beyond the sticks, and you can see that's when we talk about the technician, when we talk about football IQ, that is to a T that example where as a freshman, it's very rare to see these guys get right to the position where if you talk on Saturdays where you're thinking, oh, that's a 4th and 1 because somebody didn't get right beyond the sticks. You didn't go fully into that 5-yard thing. And those are the small little details that Kevin Cummings and Jedd Fisch will tell you separate a freshman playing and certainly playing more than 5 games potentially and not playing and just saying, hey, we need you to learn the playbook a little bit more and understand this is where we need you to be because everything's sped up on Saturdays.
When they had when they said that exact thing last fall. I'm so glad you mentioned that because they said that several times. I think the Iowa game was one of them where Jedd on that Monday press conference after was saying, we need to get a little bit deeper in our routes. We're not running our routes to the sticks. And is some of that probably on coaching and play calling? Sure. But is some of that also on the players knowing where they need to be on the field? Yes, absolutely. And that's something that Dezmen just does so well. I feel like there are people who are saying, all right, like this hype is getting a little bit out of control. But when you're out there and you're watching him, it's like you said, his hands are like glue. Everything sticks to them. And it's not just that. For me, it's the way he's able to create separation. You talk about that out-breaking route that he ran right there. There were a couple other in-breaking routes that he ran against, like Dylan Robinson and a few other guys where he's lined up in the slot and just he puts his foot in the ground and he's gone. There's no, rounding off of the route. It is a quick cut. And all of a sudden there's separation. He's open on every single play. And that's one of the reasons that whoever's on the field, DeMond, Kai Horton, Treston Keeney McMillan, whoever it is looking to him so often because he's always open. Like there's no other way to describe it. And the circus catches, all these other things that he's doing are so impressive, but it's the little things. It's the technical details that every single practice are showing up at such an advanced rate, which is just so impressive to see. And in that same light, another guy who I want to talk about who I feel like we haven't seen take a ton of first team reps as he's kind of learning all the different positions in the offense after sitting out some of spring with an injury is Omari Evans. One of my favorite plays of the day was Damon ran like a little bootleg out to the right and Omari Evans was running just kind of like a slide coming across the formation and everything. And Damon, this is going to be a play that I think we're going to see Washington just not necessarily lean on a lot, but something that's going to be a really interesting part of their offense because when Damon is getting outside the pocket like that, we've seen some of these defensive ends just continue to roll with him. Sometimes they like to drop back into the coverage. Or if you're Zach Durfee, you just bowl over whoever the receiver is and continue going after the quarterback. But Damon did a really nice job just staying calm with the pressure coming into his face and getting the ball out to Omari, who is such a fun athlete to watch. And he just turned it upfield and took it 25 yards for a touchdown, just weaving through a couple of defenders.
And I think that was Omari's second touchdown of the day because he had the opening one for a 5-yarder going, they were already in the red zone. And so that was a pretty cheap one. But not cheap, but, that was an easy dump off that Omari just kind of scooted for. But it, again, brings to the veteran presence that Omari's going to have in this room where he didn't have a ton of production at Penn State in a different offense. And so I think when Jedd when it sought that second receiver. It was, we just need a guy who can kind of do a number of different things. We don't need a true Denzel clone where, hey, we need you to go for 1,210. It's no, just kind of be that opposite guy that can kind of do a number of different things. But we have so many young receivers in the room, like we've been harping on. We don't want you to just take the focal point away from those guys' potential. We just need you to kind of balance out and bridge that gap. And that's exactly what Omari did yesterday.
And watching those guys, all of them, whoever it be, Dezmen Roebuck, Omari Evans, Rasheed Williams, watching them battle with the secondary has been so much fun to watch. So that was the first group that Jedd Fisch made sure to give a nice shout out to after the scrimmage. Was he said, I was really impressed with Ephesians Prysock. What a block field goal as well. That was a really nice play. Tacario Davis and Leroy Bryant. Is there anyone that you want to start with there?
I want to start with Leroy Bryant because it's the one where we, full disclosure, would not get the credit for on Saturdays, but Leroy had I described it to you before the show, a John Jones spinning back elbow move to get around his blocker. Ended up, I forgot who the receiver was on that play, but it looked like he forced a fumble, and then Ty Uiagalelei ended up scooping it and running it into the end zone. I asked Jedd after practice, I said, hey, do you count that? Because it looked like, from my perception, like that might have been. And Jedd was like, well, the ref said he was down, but we'll give it to him, which is, as you said, a very Jedd answer. And so worth noting in all of that is to say, Leroy is really starting to emerge in that slot role where he started opposite of Tacario for the first drive of the scrimmage, and I was a little like, Ephesians hasn't really been struggling. Like, why are we trying Leroy here? Now, maybe are you testing Leroy? Is this something you want to see him level up at? And very quickly early on, after I think 3 or 4 drives, it was, oh no, we're going to kick Leroy in, put Ephesians out there, and it almost seemed like a way to just kind of get Leroy going, kind of, just a warm up, if you will. And that trio, man, really, really impressed me yesterday.
They were so much fun to watch as a whole, where I was really impressed with Ephesians Prysock. I know he kind of has a lot to prove after the way last season went with the injury and a couple other things, but he's just had a really solid fall camp so far in coverage for the most part. I know we highlighted when he got burned by Raiden Vinesbright early on the deep route, but outside of that, we haven't really seen him been beat a lot. And I feel like just being comfortable knowing who's on the other side of the field in Tacario Davis is a big part of that. But I want to mention that Leroy play as well, because that one did come from the nickel. And you're right. It was a screenplay where he just spun away from his blocker and just did a really nice job getting to the ball. And yeah, I have stripped ? Written down in my notes because I saw the referees just mark the receiver down and everything. So I didn't know if I wanted to give it to him. But it's more about the fact that he found a way to get to the football. And it leads into something else that you and I both wanted to talk about. It was the defense in short yardage situations was so impressive yesterday. And it's something, we talk about a lot, where I'm sure people are going to have questions and say, well, was the offensive line bad? You said it was, it was a solid day for the group. Was it, was it this? Was it that? I think it's a combination of those 3 guys in the secondary and Rashawn Clark when he's out there as well, just being confident in this press man coverage. And it's something I talked about with Ryan Walters at Media Day, knowing that he has those guys that can do that. It takes away so many options, because if it is, an RPO kind of thing on 3rd and 2, and the quarterback just knows that he has to hand the ball off because there's just suffocating coverage being played on the outside, that's where this 5 down front and just these big lines that where, sometimes Buda Alukto will walk down a little bit closer and just kind of play in a mug front, like over the center or something like that. There are so many different looks that this defensive, not even just this defensive line, this whole defensive front 7 can give you, that it just makes running the ball in these short yardage situations so much more overwhelming. And that's where, when you and I talk about, like, do we know if there's an all Big Ten player on this defensive line group? I think a few players have the talent to get there, but we don't know what that rotation is going to look like and a few other things just yet. But when you can put 5, 6, 7 guys up there and just take away some of these running lanes that, last year with the depth and a few other things, you kind of just consistently got bowled over in those scenarios. I think that's something that we're really going to see change this fall.
I agree. It was something that I kind of noted where, without giving too much away, it was, you can see line changes now coming, where on 3rd down, you have, say Ontario and somebody else next to him. And then I noticed on, the 4th and 1 or whatever, 4th and 2, they would bring in the big hogs, if you will, the Logan Tagapalus, the Simone Peppas of the world. And that when we talk about, well, how are all these bodies going to sort themselves out? You don't have that true guy that's just going to stay in there for 3 or 4 downs, except for maybe Ty, because he was one of the few guys who really just didn't come off the field. But with that being said, you look at it and say, that's where Simone and Logan come into play more so than anything else, where you have some of those big body guys that can do a number of different things, but you're not asking them to stay on the field for 10, 12 snaps a drive or two. They're just coming in for 2, 3, 4, come out, put Bryce Butler and some of those other guys in. And it's that rotation basis where you're keeping fresh bodies, but the right bodies at the right time. And I think that's what's so important. That's where I can kind of now see why they went out and sought some of these guys in the portal, both last year and this year, to pair with, some of the not thinner defensive linemen, like the Leroy Davis of the world, where the younger guys, the Omar Khans of the world, where we can see what's coming next, but you still need some of those meat road graders on short yardage scenarios to make sure you can plug up those lanes. And worth also noting, Xe'ree Alexander, I forgot who it was on, maybe it was Jordan Washington or somebody, just absolutely blew up a play on the backfield. So you mentioned,
he was excellent, yeah.
And that was another one where it's, okay, it might not come from the defensive line, but it's coming from that front 7, even on short yardage. So no matter who's ending up breaking through that line, you have enough bodies, and there's always going to be at least somebody, at least 1 or 2 players that are ending up in the backfield. And again, that's all you can ask for is Ryan Walters.
So let's talk about Xe'ree Alexander then for a minute, because that was something I noted a few times where he was working a lot with the second team against backup right tackle Sowane Fasolo. And he did a really good job just getting to his outside shoulder and getting a little bit of dip around the edge. And that's something that I'm really excited to see how it plays out this fall, because he is a really intriguing player to watch, where at the spring, like he's played mainly along like inside linebacker, split, I would say pretty close to 50-50 between inside and outside. Now, after the Russell Davis injury, it feels like they've kind of shifted him to outside linebacker full time, where he'll still move inside every once in a while, but he's playing so much more in that role. And at 245, 250 pounds, if he can continue to get after the passer a little bit and still, he's big and strong enough now at 245, whatever he is, to set the edge against the run a little bit better. That's a real weapon to have when, you think about the rest of this room, where Deshaun Lynch is going to do that really well. We know Zach Durfee can when he's on the field. Jacob Lane has had a really nice fall camp as well. If you can just have one of those guys, because Hayden Moore had a few really nice reps as well during Saturday's camp. If you can just have one more guy continue to round out that room, there are still questions there. Isaiah Ward has been injured. We haven't seen him in about a week. It doesn't sound like he's going to be out for much longer, but it's something to monitor there. If you can have depth at that position, especially with the way this defensive scheme is going to just put stress on the interior of offensive lines and force these tackles into one-on-one situations, if you can find guys who can win those battles, which is why Zach Durfee staying healthy is so important right now. If you can find one more of those guys, you can just really amp this pass rush up to just a level we haven't seen, outside of what Braylon Trice was doing in a couple of years, really.
Yeah, I was trying to think back to when you could find the last truly game record. I mean, Holy Kikaha goes way back, but, there's been a number of him, man. And I'm not saying any of these guys are truly like that, but I think worth noting on Hayden Moore, I think yesterday kind of showed why they moved him to outside linebacker, why that kind of position change came to fruition, because he wasn't going to play at inside linebacker with the depth they have with Tyreek and Xe'ree, and go on down the list of those guys. And Devin Bryant, by the way, at PBU had a great day in my opinion.
Yeah, he's been really impressive.
So I think if any questions about the depth were there, I think that's more than solidified. But Hayden Moore really impressed me coming off the edge. Now, again, we're in context, and a lot of it was against the second team and things like that. But still, you're seeing a guy get such consistent. I swear, it seemed like every other snap he was in the backfield at certain times in the scrimmage. And obviously, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it still to me showed, okay, there's at least a reason why he made the switch. And even if he's the guy that just becomes a contributor, where I'm not saying he's going to have 3, 4, 5 sacks, and I'm not saying that, but just a guy that if you need to call his number and he can make an impact,
does a job on a play.
Yeah, just be a guy. Exactly, just does a job. That's all you really are asking, especially that guy opposite of Zach Durfee. That's really what you're looking for, is just make sure you're just pushing the pocket, and that's really all you need to do, because everybody else is going to collapse as well.
And that's a really good point, because I think that's something that really, we've talked about it a lot, has been the theme of this defensive line. If these guys can all just contribute to an average to slightly above average level, this unit will take such a significant step forward from where it is. I don't think we're saying this is going to be, a top 3, top 5 group in the conference, but if it's somewhere in that 7 to 10 range, especially after finishing 15th in the conference in sacks last year, that is a significant step up from where you were. And it just lends to not only what Ryan Walters is doing, but just the talent of the unit being, just so far above where it was last season. And one guy who I think fits into that really well on the back end of things, because this is something that we got to talk to Taylor Mays about a little bit, and then Alex McLaughlin and CJ Christian as well, is Taylor Mays has spent so much of this fall camp trying to get guys to learn both positions. And with Rylan Dillard-Allen, he's someone who in the spring was mainly playing in the post. Now, there's something we saw yesterday. He was playing in the box a lot more. And that's something where I don't think that's going to be what he's doing long term. But the fact that this coaching staff says, we want you to be comfortable at both positions means something that you and I have been saying for a while, that they're gearing up to make sure he's on the field this season.
Yeah, if anything, that answers that question, where no matter how many snaps it is, he's going to play, I want to say all 13. I just don't know how we're going to find it, but like Rylan is proving day in and day out, they're going to have a hard time keeping him off the field. He's not going to start, not going to be like that, but special teams, even on the secondary, like he's going to find his way on the field, no doubt.
I couldn't agree with you more. One more thing before we get out of here. I was really impressed with Luke Dunne, man, where it was something just watching him kick yesterday. I'm not going to act like I'm a special teams expert or anything like that. But one thing that was very, very apparent, because they haven't done a lot of, punting and kicking drills in practice. And when they are working on, special teams returns and things like that, sometimes they're like shooting balls off a jugs machine or something like that for these players to catch and just to like work on these different coverages and things. And Luke Dunne, he was able to just get several different kinds of punts off. There wasn't one type of rotation on the ball. There was so much arc. I know our buddy Nick Lemkow, who is just a phenomenal special teams resource, as is our good buddy Alex Katzen, had one of his punts at like a 4.4 hang time. There were multiple that traveled 50 plus yards in the air. Like it looks so much different than what we've seen, like really since Race Porter was punting.
It really does. I counted 7 punts inside the 20 during live actual drills. And I think Jedd even said there was a couple inside the 5. That to me is when you were talking about flipping the script. Obviously, when I asked Jedd about it, I was like, hey, I know you don't really want to punt, but when you do, you feel good about it. He's like, oh, no, yeah. Like, again, hopefully we're not in that position a ton, but if we are, I have no doubt we can flip the field. And that is going to be one of those small areas where if you do need to punt 1 or 2 times, pin them down inside the 10, inside the 5, force a 3 and out, get the ball back inside plus territory. Those are those small little changes where we talk about 7 to 10 points scoring. That's where it comes into play.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout fall camp. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so when we post new show. Plus, if you got any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.